race relations in the United States, politics in the United States, the intersection thereof, power and how it's handled in the United States, and I would argue that an awful lot of this can be tracked back to 1965. The Hart, I forget the last word. It was Hart-Column bill. It was the formal name of the law was was something to the effect of the Immigration Reform Act of 1965. You know, and one of its people, I think it's Hart-Column. But in any case, prior to then, what we had in the United States that went back to 1921, this was first put into law in 1921. We had the first immigration law. Prior to 1920, like when my grandfather came to this country from Norway in 1919, you know, it was just Ellis Island. You know, you just walk in. Well, in 21, they said, okay, enough. We're going to stop people from immigrating into the United States, and we're going to have a legal process for this. And that law in 1921 said that if you want to come into the United States, your race is going to determine your eligibility. And at that point in time, over 80%, 86% of all the immigrants to the United States, starting in 1921, from 1921 to 1965, during that period of time, 86% of all the immigrants into the United States were white Europeans or Canadians. And this Hart-McCollum Act, or whatever it was, the Immigration Reform Act of 1965, literally changed that. It did away with the racial quotas. And so now what we're finding is that as of 2017, if my memory serves, I'm doing this, I read this stuff yesterday, so I'm doing this from memory, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. In 2017, it was around 14%, between 14 and 18% of all the immigrants into the United States were actually from Europe, white Europeans or Canadians. And the result of that is that the white people in the United States are on the verge of becoming the minority, if not already the minority. And the result of that is that you've got a total white freakout going on. And we should just acknowledge this right up front. And in Texas, what did they do when Texas hit this threshold, by the way, a decade ago, where a majority of their voters are no longer white? What Texas is doing is they're getting rid of all the voting districts, re-gerrymandering them so that no black people in particular and Hispanic people secondarily will represent Texas in Congress anymore, or as few as possible. I mean, they got 2 new districts. Over 90% of the growth in the population of Texas was non-white people, and they got 2 new districts, and they organized them, they gerrymandered them specifically to be all white, all Republican districts. Or at least all white, all Republican representation. Excuse me, the districts are obviously not. And now we're seeing down in Georgia the same thing. And this is Georgia, now the Republican Party in Georgia, executing Donald Trump's playbook to end democracy in America. I don't know what else you can call it. Justin Glau, from writing out of Griffin, Georgia, for The Guardian, in an article that's headlined, "Georgia County Purges Democrats from Election Board and Cancels Sunday Voting," notes that back in May, this group of judges met in private over a 2-day period to choose the 5th member of an election board in Spalding County, Georgia. Now, it should have been uncontroversial, but it was apparently very controversial. The board met in secret. It's supposed to be a public meeting. They published no notes about their conversations. The only reason that this position was open was because of a new law that white Republicans in the Georgia legislature had passed that made it possible. And they named a white Republican to this board, giving white Republican control to the elections board in Spalding County, Georgia, for the first time in decades. And to quote the article in The Guardian, quote, "Almost immediately, that Republican, James Newland, cast the deciding vote to cancel Sunday voting, a historically heavy turnout day for black, largely Democratic voters in Spalding County. They go on to note what happened in Spalding County is just a fragment of Republican efforts nationwide to take over the apparatus of America's elections. Now, occasionally you'll hear somebody mention this, but this should be a hair on fire moment. The Republican Party is trying to secure control of every level of government. From the White House and the Senate and the House of Representatives and the Supreme Court, they've got the Supreme Court. From the other two branches of the federal government to every branch of state government in every state possible, to county governments, to school boards. I mean, they are really making a sincere and concerted effort with the help of a number of white billionaire, donors and funders to seize control of all of the political systems of America. Now, a lot of Americans are sitting around going, well, so what? How does it matter if a Republican is running the election or a Democrat is running the election? I still vote. Doesn't that count? Well, no. Now, historically, people running elections have not used or abused that power, but now we have laws in several states that actually give them the power to reject votes and voters. And when you have an entire country seized by one political party, and yeah, I get it. There have been times when one political party was dominant in the United States. For example, the Democratic Party after the Republican Great Depression. Basically, nobody wanted to vote for a Republican. And you can argue that in some places, and certainly it was the case, New York State is probably the best example, but in a lot of places you had political parties that were so corrupt, you had what was called machine politics, that, stuff was going on that didn't comport with democracy, shall we say. But now you've got over 200 pieces of legislation authorizing this in all 50 states that have been introduced, and more than a half dozen have been passed. As they note here, the turn of events in Spalding County might have come as a shock to locals. A majority Democratic election board with 3 black women becoming majority Republican with 2 white men virtually overnight. And then they note Spalding County is no outlier. In at least 5 other Georgia counties, local election authorities have been restructured in favor of Republicans. So what do you call a country where one political party is not only has political power like the Democrats did in the 30s and 40s, but is using that political power to change the voting systems so that they never lose power? Well, now you've got a situation like you see in Hungary, like you see in Russia, like you see in Turkey, like increasingly we're seeing in India, formerly democratic countries that have become authoritarian or oligarchic, like what you see in Singapore, like what you see, it's just all over the world, right? In fact, probably countries run by little mini autocracies are more common than they are uncommon. But we are definitely moving in that direction, and this is not a healthy thing. And I wanted to flag this for you. I know I've talked about it many times on this program, but I don't think it can be said often enough that the Republican Party has made a deal with the devil. They have decided that they are going to go into the business of rigging elections in this country and rigging education, and I want to get into that in more detail tomorrow, to ensure the continuation of their power. As I said in the last hour, power rarely surrenders itself voluntarily, and corrupt power never does. And that's what we're looking at.